The champagne glass slipped from my fingers and shattered across the marble floor. Nobody moved to help me. Instead, Constance Waverly, my mother-in-law, the woman who had smiled at our wedding like she was swallowing medicine, raised her voice above the Christmas music and addressed the entire room. "Everyone, take a good look," she said, spreading her arms wide like a woman giving a performance. And she was. "This is what a mistake looks like when you dress it up and bring it to dinner." Laughter exploded from every corner, loud, sharp, the kind of laughter that has teeth. My sister-in-law, Vivienne, pulled out her phone and pointed it straight at my face, recording, smiling. My brother-in-law, Callum, clapped slowly like a man watching a bad play finally reach its ending. Someone near the back whispered, "Embarrassing." Someone else said, "She never belonged here." I turned to my husband, Dorian. He was already stepping backward, away from me, like I was a fire he didn't want near him. His eyes found the floor instead of my face. Then Constance delivered the final blow, calm, precise, and loud enough for every investor, every relative, every stranger in that room to hear clearly. Effective immediately, you are removed from the foundation, the accounts in this house. You contributed nothing. You are nothing. Security, please escort her out. My chest tightened. My hands shook. But I did not cry. Because while they thought they had just destroyed me, I knew something they didn't. I had been waiting for exactly this night. My name is Elara Vance-Waverly. And I need you to stay with me tonight because what I am about to tell you is not just my story. It is the story of every person who is ever called too quiet, too careful, too plain, too much of nothing. If you are watching this late at night or early in the morning before the world wakes up, I want to hear from you. Drop your city and your local time in the comments right now. Tell me whether you believe in revenge or walking away, because by the time you reach the end of this story, your answer might surprise you. I married into the Waverly family 6 years ago. They were old money, the kind that had portraits in the hallways and lawyers on speed dial. They had a foundation, a mansion, and a name that opened doors in 3 different states. And from the very first dinner, they made it clear that I, Elara Vance, daughter of a school teacher and a retired postal worker, was not what they had in mind for Dorian. They were right that I was different from them. They were completely wrong about why that mattered. I didn't come from wealth. I came from discipline. From watching my mother stretch every dollar until it practically begged for mercy. From learning early that the person who pays attention always wins in the end. They called me the family outcast for 6 long years. What they didn't know was that I had been paying very close attention to everything. The first time they humiliated me, I almost missed it. It was subtle the way the best cruelty always is. Constance made a small comment about my dress at the engagement dinner. "Darling, is that from a department store? How practical." She smiled when she said it. Everyone else smiled too. "Joke, just a joke." But then it happened again, and the jokes got louder. At my first Waverly Christmas, Vivienne handed me an apron and asked if I wouldn't mind helping the caterers serve drinks. At my own engagement party, in my own future home. I took the apron, I smiled, and I filled it away. They excluded me from conversations about the family business. When I offered an opinion at dinner, Constance talked over me like I hadn't spoken. Callum once introduced me at a charity event as Dorian's friend. Not his wife, his friend. Every time I said something too direct, too honest, they called me sensitive. "Elara, you're so sensitive. It was just a joke." That word sensitive became their favorite weapon. It made my pain sound like my problem, my weakness, my fault. I learned something important during those early years. Gaslighting works best on people who still want to believe the best about their family. And I did want to believe, for longer than I should have. But eventually something shifted inside me. I stopped wanting to belong. And I started wanting to understand. There is a big difference between those two things, and that difference, that quiet turning point, would change absolutely everything. The Waverly name was polished to a high shine. From the outside, they looked like everything a family should be: generous, respected, powerful. They had the foundation, the mansion, the right invitations, the right friends. But I lived inside the walls. And inside I started seeing the cracks. It began with small things. A late-night phone call that made Callum sweat through his collar. A stack of unopened bills I found in a drawer when I was searching for a pen. A whispered argument between Constance and her accountant that stopped the second I walked into the kitchen. I said nothing. But I started paying attention in a different way. Not as a wife trying to fit in, but as a woman trying to understand what she had actually married into. They spent money like water. Cars, parties, vacations in places I had only seen in magazines, but the numbers never added up. A family this celebrated shouldn't have been that tense about a catering invoice. A man as successful as Callum claimed to be shouldn't have gone pale at the mention of a quarterly audit. I began keeping a small notebook. Nothing dramatic. Just dates, amounts, things I heard, things I noticed. I told no one. I want to ask you something right now. Have you ever watched someone perform wealth while quietly drowning underneath it? Drop a yes or no in the comments, because the Waverly family put on the greatest performance I had ever witnessed. The only problem with a fake lifestyle is that reality always leaves receipts. And I was learning exactly where to find them. It was a Tuesday night in February when everything changed. I was looking for a folder of household documents in Callum's home office. He had borrowed some insurance paperwork months ago and never returned it. The door was slightly open. The lights were on. Callum was at the desk with his back to me. He didn't hear me come in. I watched him for a moment, unsure whether to knock or leave, and then I saw what he was doing. He was signing a document, slowly, carefully, checking something on his phone between each stroke of the pen. He was copying a signature, not his own. The letterhead at the top of the page read Waverly Family Trust Fund Authorization. I stepped back quietly into the hallway. My heart was hammering, but my face was completely calm. I pulled out my phone. I walked just close enough to the doorway to angle the lens carefully. And I took 3 photographs, clear, steady, time-stamped. Then I walked to the kitchen, put the kettle on, and made tea. Callum came out 20 minutes later and said, "Good night, Elara." I said, "Good night," and smiled. That photo changed everything. Because up until that moment I had been collecting observations, impressions, suspicions, things that could be explained away. But a forged signature on a family trust document? That was evidence, real, hard, irrefutable. I saved the photos to a private cloud account that no one in the Waverly family knew existed. And I started a second folder. I named it The Truth. I want to pause and ask you something personal. Have you ever loved someone and discovered that love was only ever one-sided? That while you were building something real, they were already planning the exit? Because that is exactly what happened with Dorian. The night I found out, I was not even looking for anything. I had come home early from a volunteer event at the foundation, one I had personally organized, and Dorian was on the back porch on the phone. He didn't hear the door. I heard every word. "She won't be around much longer," he said, laughing softly. "She thinks she's part of this family. She's no idea. She's temporary, Nicola. She has always been temporary." Nicola! I stood in the hallway for what felt like 10 years. Then I walked quietly to the kitchen, sat down, and put my hands flat on the cold countertop. I did not cry. I did not pick up the phone and call anyone. I sat very still and let those words settle into something solid inside me. He was not just cheating on me. He was coordinating with someone named Nicola, about removing me, about a timeline, about making sure I disappeared from the Waverly picture cleanly and quietly. This was not a marriage falling apart. This was a plan. And I had just become something I had never imagined myself to be. I was alone, completely, deliberately alone. But here is what they never understood about a woman who is truly alone. She's nothing left to lose. And that made me very, very dangerous. There was one person in the Waverly family who never laughed at me. Not once. Alistair Waverly was 81 years old. He walked with a cane. He wore the same cardigan to every Sunday dinner. He asked for his tea at exactly 3 p.m. and did not appreciate it when it came late. The rest of the family treated him like a piece of furniture, respected in theory, ignored in practice. They thought he was fading, slowing down, past his time. They were wrong. I first noticed it at a dinner in March. Everyone was talking over each other. Constance performing generosity, Callum performing success, Dorian performing the role of devoted son. And Alistair sat at the head of the table and said absolutely nothing. But his eyes moved. Quietly, carefully, from face to face, like a man reading a book he had read before and was checking for the parts that had changed. After dinner, he found me alone on the porch. He stood beside me for a moment without speaking. Then he said very quietly, "You see more than you say." It was not a question. I looked at him. I've learned that it's safer that way. He nodded slowly. "Wisdom," he said, "rare in this house." And then he went back inside. That was all. 4 sentences between us. But something shifted that evening. A door opened, even if only a crack. I realized for the first time that I was not the only one watching the Waverly family perform their beautiful, hollow life. Alistair Waverly was watching too. After that night on the porch, Alistair began to seek me out. Not obviously. Not in a way the rest of the family would notice. It was always small moments, asking me to walk with him to the garden after Sunday dinner while the others argued inside, or calling me to the library to help him organize some old estate photographs. But the conversations were never small. He asked me questions that nobody else in that house had ever bothered to ask. What did I think about the foundation's investment structure? Was I familiar with the concept of a blind trust? What did financial discipline truly mean to me? I answered honestly, every single time. Meanwhile, outside those quiet conversations, the family's cruelty was getting louder. Vivian started calling me the charity case at family dinners, always just under her breath, always just loud enough for me to catch it. Callum began removing me from family email threads without explanation. Constance stopped inviting me to the planning meetings for the foundation events that I had personally organized for 3 full years. I absorbed every single insult. And I kept answering Alistair's questions with complete honesty. Here is something I want you to understand, and leave a comment if this resonates with you. When you are being underestimated by everyone in a room, the most powerful thing you can do is find the one person who is still paying real attention. And make absolutely sure they see who you truly are. Because Alistair was measuring everyone in that family. And every insult they threw at me was being quietly counted by him. September, the Waverly Foundation Charity Gala. Black tie, chandeliers, every powerful name in the county seated under one roof. This was the event I had spent 4 months building, from the ground up: venues, donors, catering, the silent auction, every detail of the guest list. Every single piece of it had passed through my hands. And when the evening arrived, I was introduced to the room as Dorian's companion. Not his wife, not the woman who had built the entire event from scratch, his companion. Constance stood at the microphone and described the gala as a Waverly family achievement. She thanked Vivienne for her creative vision. She thanked Callum for his business connections. She thanked Dorian for his leadership. She did not say my name. Not once. I stood near the back of the room in the dress I had chosen for this exact night, navy blue, simple, elegant, and I smiled. I smiled because across the room I could see Alistair Waverly watching me. He was not watching the stage. He was watching my face. He wasn't watching to see if I would break. He was watching to see how I handled it. I held his gaze for exactly 3 seconds. Then I raised my glass of sparkling water toward him just slightly, a quiet, private salute. He gave me the smallest nod. Later that evening, while the family celebrated with champagne, I went to the bathroom and wrote 2 words in my notebook. They know. Then I closed the notebook and went back out to smile at the donors. Someone was taking notes tonight. More than one, someone. What I did not know that September night, what I would not discover until much later, was that Alistair had already been moving pieces on the board long before I ever started playing mine. 3 months before the gala, he had quietly hired a private investigation firm from the city. Not a small operation. A serious firm, forensic accountants, licensed investigators, a full legal team on retainer. He had authorized complete financial audits of every Waverly account. The foundation, the personal trusts, the business holdings. He had requested surveillance on key transactions. He had ordered background checks on every person tied to the Waverly estate, including Dorian, Callum, Vivienne, and Constance. Everyone except me. He had already checked me. I learned this later. He had gone through every financial record, every business dealing, every document connected to my name before he ever said a single word to me on that porch. I passed completely. But the rest of the family? The audit had already started pulling at loose threads, and threads once pulled have a way of unraveling entire sweaters. Here is what I want you to think about right now. Hit the like button if you agree with this. The most dangerous person in any room is not the loudest one. It is the one who has already done the homework. Alistair Waverly had been doing his homework for months. And the Waverly family, laughing at their Christmas parties, performing their hollow grace, spending their fake fortune, had absolutely no idea they were already under investigation. The truth was already in motion. And nobody in that house had any idea how close it was. While the investigation moved quietly in the background, I kept building. I want you to understand something about those years inside that family. I was not sitting still. I was not waiting to be rescued. I was working. Every dollar of my own money, the salary I had kept in my own account from the beginning, the small inheritance from my father that I had quietly invested 3 years before I ever met Dorian. I managed carefully, not in any Waverly account, not in any joint fund. In accounts that carried only my name. I had started with a modest amount. Over 4 years, I had grown it steadily through index funds, a small real estate investment, and one well-timed decision about a technology company that a college friend had mentioned over coffee. I was not wealthy. Not yet. But I had built something clean, solid, and completely invisible to the Waverly family. They called me cheap because I never spent recklessly. They laughed at my sensible choices and my practical shoes. Vivienne once said at a family brunch loudly, so everyone at the table could hear, "Elara counts every penny like she's afraid they'll run away from her." Everyone laughed. I smiled. Because what Vivienne didn't understand, what none of them understood, is that the person who counts every penny is exactly the kind of person who ends up owning the room. Control over money is not weakness. It is power. And while the Waverly family performed their extravagant lifestyle on borrowed time and borrowed money, I was building something real. Something they could never touch. I found the affair on a Wednesday. Not because I was looking. I was not the kind of woman who went through her husband's phone searching for trouble. What I found by accident, and what I discovered was far worse than a simple betrayal. Dorian had left his tablet open on the kitchen counter. A message thread was visible on the screen. I saw the name Nicola, the same name I had heard on the porch months earlier. I read one screen before I looked away. That one screen told me everything. Nicola was not simply a woman Dorian was seeing. She was someone he had been meeting with for over 2 years. She knew details about the family finances. She had opinions about how the estate should be structured after a divorce. She had asked Dorian specific questions about which assets were in my name. His answers told her correctly that nothing was. But then came the line that made my blood go cold. Dorian had written, "Once the old man goes, we move forward. The will is handled." The will is handled? I set the tablet down exactly as I had found it. I walked to my bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed, and breathed slowly for 5 full minutes. Then I went back to the kitchen, took 3 photographs of the screen, and uploaded them immediately to the truth folder. My hands were steady. My decision was made. Whatever came next, I would be ready. This was no longer about surviving inside the Waverly family. This was about winning. After the affair discovery, I began paying closer attention to Alistair. During one of our library conversations, he had mentioned the family history, the founding of the estate, the original Waverly patriarch, how the bloodline had always determined inheritance. He had said it in a casual way, an old man remembering the past. But then he had paused and added something that stayed with me. "Bloodlines are funny things," he had said quietly. "They carry secrets that families spend generations pretending don't exist." I had not asked him what he meant at the time. But one afternoon in October, I came across a document that made those words suddenly very loud in my memory. I was helping Alistair organize some old estate papers in the library. He had asked me specifically to help with the filing, and I found a folder labeled Confidential, Medical Waverly Estate. I did not open it. But I noticed the date on the outside cover 19 years earlier. And in the margin, in handwriting I did not recognize, someone had written 4 words. Bloodline risk, see attached. I placed the folder carefully in the cabinet exactly where Alistair had indicated. I said absolutely nothing. But something had shifted inside me. A quiet alarm had begun ringing somewhere deep in the back of my mind. Whatever that folder contained, it was not nothing. It was clearly not something that had been resolved. And the fact that Alistair had asked me specifically to file it told me something else entirely. He had wanted me to see it. By November, things were accelerating in a direction I could not ignore. Constance had called a family meeting without me to discuss what she described as restructuring the foundation's leadership team. I found out through a household assistant who felt uncomfortable about the secrecy and came to tell me quietly. 3 days later, my access to the foundation's shared email system was quietly removed. A week after that, Dorian mentioned over dinner very casually, like he was discussing the whether that the house insurance had been updated and my name had been removed as a co-policy holder. "Standard update," he said. I nodded. Of course. Then I went upstairs and documented every single change with screenshots, dates, and detailed notes. What they were doing was building a wall around me, quietly, methodically, but cutting off access piece by piece so that when the final removal came, I would have nothing to stand on. It was well planned. But here's the thing about people who underestimate you. For years they plan based on the version of you they think they know. They plan for the quiet woman who absorbs, adjusts, and eventually walks away with nothing. They do not plan for the woman who has been documenting everything. I want to pause here. Are you watching this during the day or late at night? Tell me in the comments. And tell me this, have you ever deliberately let someone think they were winning? Because that is exactly what I was doing. I let them build their wall. I was already standing on the other side of it. The Christmas party invitation arrived in early December. A formal card, thick cream paper, gold lettering, the Waverly family crest pressed into the corner, Constance's handwriting. She had written my name at the top with the kind of deliberate care that tells you the gesture cost something to make. For one brief moment, I wondered if I had been wrong about everything. If perhaps the family was extending a real olive branch. If perhaps Dorian had said something kind on my behalf for once. Then I read the rest of the card. It's a large gathering. Investors, business partners, extended family, the foundation's board of trustees, the kind of room where reputations are made and destroyed in a single evening. And I understood. I thought about everything I had been collecting for 2 years. Every photograph, every document, every recorded conversation saved to the truth folder. I thought about Dorian's message on his tablet. The will is handled. I thought about the medical folder in the library. The forged signatures. And I understood what this party really was. This was not an olive branch. This was the stage they had chosen for the public execution. They were going to humiliate me in front of everyone who mattered to them. Remove me loudly, publicly, with maximum witnesses. Leave me with no ground to stand on and no dignity to carry out the door. They wanted to end me completely. I accepted the invitation. I wrote back in my neatest handwriting, looking forward to it. Because so was I. What happened next, nobody in that room was ready for. And so I walked into that Christmas party knowing exactly what was coming. Let me take you back inside that room. The chandeliers, the music, the scent of pine and expensive perfume. Dorian at my side, already maintaining careful distance, close enough to appear like a husband, far enough to step away without effort. Constance in a red gown, moving through the crowd like she owned every person in it. Vivienne with her phone already angled. Ready? Callum, near the bar, smiling the smile of a man who believes the hard part is already done. I wore a simple black dress, my grandmother's pearl earrings, the only jewelry I owned that came from someone who had truly loved me. My hair was neat, my hands were still. I had done my work 24 hours earlier. Every document, every photograph, every recording had been uploaded to 3 separate secure cloud accounts. I had emailed a complete copy to my attorney, a woman named Frances Okafor, whom I had retained quietly 4 months before, and who was waiting for my signal. I had also said goodbye to Alistair before I left the house. He had taken my hand and said very quietly, "Whatever happens tonight, do not be afraid." His eyes were sharp and completely clear. "It will not go the way they expect." I squeezed his hand. He squeezed mine back. Then I walked into the party. And when Constance's voice cut through the Christmas music like a blade, when the glass shattered at my feet and the laughter exploded, I did not cry. Because I had already won. They just didn't know it yet. Alistair Waverly died 3 days after that Christmas party. He passed in his sleep, quietly, in the bedroom he had occupied for 50 years. The housekeeper found him in the early morning. He looked, she said later, completely at peace. The family gathered at the house within hours. And I want you to watch this part carefully because this is where people reveal exactly who they truly are. Constance cried beautifully. She had a gift for this, the kind of grief that performs perfectly in a room full of witnesses. Vivienne posted a tribute on social media within 2 hours. Callum began making phone calls before the afternoon was over, and several of those calls were to the family's lawyer. Dorian held my hand at the memorial. First time in months. He held it warmly, publicly, in front of everyone. He looked like a devoted husband standing beside his grieving wife. He leaned in once and whispered, "This is going to be a complicated few weeks. Stay close to me." I looked at him. "Of course," I said. But what I was thinking was, you have absolutely no idea what the next few weeks are going to bring. Because I had spoken to Frances Okafor the morning after the Christmas party. She had already been in quiet contact with Alistair's personal attorney, a separate attorney that nobody in the Waverly family knew existed, whom Alistair had retained privately years earlier. I knew what was in that will. Alistair had told me himself, 6 weeks before he died in the library with the door closed. He had told me everything, and I had been carrying that knowledge in complete silence ever since. The will reading was scheduled for January 4th. The family's lawyer, the one Callum had been calling, arrived first. He sat up at the long dining table with a leather folder and a very professional expression. The family assembled as though they were waiting for Christmas morning all over again. Constance sat at the head of the table, already in Alistair's chair. She was redecorating the house in her mind. I could see it in her eyes as she surveyed the room. Dorian sat beside me, still performing the devoted husband. Callum had brought his own notepad. The lawyer opened the folder, cleared his throat, and began reading. The early bequests are expected. Staff members received generous amounts. The household was provided for. Various charitable organizations received significant donations. Then the lawyer paused. He looked up from the document, and then a second man, someone nobody at the table had seen before, introduced himself. He was Alistair's private attorney, retained separately from the family's firm years earlier. He opened a second folder. He cleared his throat once. Pertaining to the controlling interest of the Waverly estate and all associated assets valued at the time of signing at approximately $150 million, Alistair Waverly leaves the following instructions. The room was absolutely silent. He looked directly at me. To Elara Vance-Waverly, who demonstrated the integrity, discipline, and clarity of judgment that this family has long forgotten, I leave controlling interest of the estate in its entirety. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then the room exploded. If you're still watching, please hit that like button right now. Because what happened in that room after those words were read is something I will never forget for the rest of my life. Constance stood up so fast her chair scraped the floor. This is fraud, she said. Her voice was not beautiful anymore. It was raw and ugly and very real. This is manipulation. This woman worked on a dying old man. I am calling our lawyers this very minute. Callum was already on his phone before she finished the sentence. Dorian sat completely still beside me. His face had gone the color of old newspaper. He stared at the table. He could not look at me. Vivienne, who had laughed at me at every family dinner, who had handed me an apron at my own engagement party, who had filmed my humiliation at Christmas, put her hand over her mouth and said absolutely nothing. Alistair's private attorney waited calmly for the noise to settle. Then he placed a thick document on the table. The will was signed and notarized 14 months ago, he said. 2 separate psychiatric evaluations confirmed Mr. Waverly's full mental capacity at the time of signing. 3 independent witnesses were present. The document has been reviewed by our firm and a second independent legal team. It is fully airtight. He slid a copy toward Constance. You are welcome to pursue whatever challenge you believe is appropriate, he said evenly. However, Mr. Waverly anticipated exactly this response. He paused. He left something else. The second folder hit the table. Not dramatically, the attorney simply placed it down the way you would set a glass of water. Calm, ordinary, final. But what was inside that folder was none of those things. Mr. Waverly, attorney explained, authorized a full independent financial investigation of the Waverly family's activities 18 months ago. The findings are documented in this report. Copies have already been filled with the relevant regulatory authorities effective this morning. Constance sat back down. The color left Callum's face completely. The report was thorough. I had seen a summary of it. Alistair had walked me through the key findings in the library 4 weeks before he died. But seeing it placed on the table in front of the entire family was something else entirely. It changed the air in that room. The findings included forged authorization signatures on trust fund withdrawals, Callum's work, documented with photographs and handwriting analysis, undisclosed personal debt buried inside the foundation's charitable accounts, Evidence of a coordinated plan to remove me from the estate, emails, meeting notes, a legal letter that had been drafted but never sent, and one line in the executive summary that the attorney read aloud. Elara Vance-Waverly demonstrated consistent financial integrity, personal discipline, and complete absence of misconduct across the entire period of investigation. She's the only member of the immediate Waverly household of whom this can be said. Alistair's sister, Aunt Bertie, sitting quietly in the corner the entire time, began to cry. Callum put his notepad away. Nobody in that room was laughing anymore. After the will reading, they came for me in waves. The first wave was legal. Constance hired 3 different law firms within 48 hours. They sent letters, made phone calls, and demanded urgent meetings. Francis Oka, for my attorney, handled everything with calm, thorough precision. Every challenge they raised was met with hard documentation. Every accusation was answered with dated evidence. Every claim of manipulation was dismantled by the psychiatric evaluations, the 3 independent witnesses, and the 14-month paper trail that supported the will completely. The second wave was emotional. Dorian came to me 2 days after the reading. He sat at the kitchen table, the same kitchen where I had once heard him call me temporary, and told me he was sorry, that he had been under enormous pressure from the family, that he had never truly meant any of it. I listened. I nodded. Then I told him I had retained a divorce attorney. He stared at me. Elara. The paperwork was filled yesterday morning, I said quietly. Francis will be in touch with your representation. The third wave was manipulation. Vivienne sent me a handwritten card, 4 paragraphs about family and love and how blood is thicker than mistakes. Callum called and said he was willing to explain everything, that I had misunderstood the financial situation entirely. I want you to think about something and leave a comment below. When the people who mocked you, filmed your humiliation, and worked to erase you suddenly find that they need something from you, what do they call it? They call it family. I thought the will was the biggest twist in this story. I was wrong. 3 weeks after the reading, Alistair's private attorney called me. He said there was one final component of the investigation that had taken longer to formally confirm. He asked if he could meet me at Francis's office. I sat across from both of them at a conference table on a cold January morning. The attorney opened a 3rd folder. During the course of the investigation, he said carefully, a medical records discrepancy was identified. Mr. Waverly became aware of this approximately 2 years ago and authorized a private DNA analysis to confirm or rule out what he suspected. He slid a document across the table. The results were confirmed 6 months before Mr. Waverly's death. I looked at the document. I read it twice. The DNA analysis had been conducted on all 4 members of the immediate Waverly family household. The process had been fully legal, using samples obtained through the investigation. The results were stunning. One member of the Waverly family was not biologically related to Alistair Waverly. Not even partially. The inheritance, as structured under the original Waverly estate terms, required confirmed biological lineage for all primary beneficiaries. Any heir found to lack a biological connection to Alistair would be reclassified under the estate's secondary provisions. The attorney looked at me steadily. This does not affect your inheritance at all, Mrs. Vance-Waverly, he said. It significantly affects theirs. I set the document down. Who? I asked. You told me. And I finally understood why Alistair had said that bloodlines carry secrets. I need you to stay with me because this is the part of the story that nobody in the Waverly family ever saw coming. Not even close. The DNA results showed that Callum Waverly, the man who had supervised his own brother forging family trust documents, the man who had introduced me as Dorian's friend, the man who had clapped at my humiliation at Christmas, was not Alistair Waverly's biological son. He never had been. The investigation had found, buried in old correspondence, evidence of a long affair between Constance and a business associate of Alistair's from 30 years ago. An affair that had produced a child. An affair that Constance had buried and hidden and built an entire family identity on top of for 3 decades. Alistair had known for 2 years. He had said nothing publicly. But he had restructured the will, quietly, carefully, legally. Under the original estate terms, Callum's claim to any primary inheritance was now void. His portion reverted to the estate's general holdings, which were now under my controlling interest. When Callum was formally informed by the attorney, I was not present in that room. But I was told afterward that he sat in complete silence for a very long time. Then he asked one single question. Does my mother know that I know? The attorney confirmed that Constance had been notified simultaneously. I want you to think about this. Please comment below. What is worse, being betrayed by an enemy, or discovering that the person you trusted most built your entire identity on a lie? That was Callum's reality. And Constance had no one left to perform for. Within days, the story was out. Not because I said a single word publicly. Francis had made it completely clear that discretion was essential during the legal proceedings, and I honored that without question. But the Waverly family, unable to control their own panic, began talking to the wrong people. Constance called relatives. Callum argued with the estate attorney in a very public setting. Dorian, I was told, had a visible emotional breakdown at a business lunch attended by people who talked. And in a world where everyone has a phone, the story moved. The financial misconduct, the forged signatures, the investigation findings, the DNA revelation, the will. All of it. It spread through social circles, business contacts, and the Foundation's donor network like a fire in dry grass. The same investors who had attended the Christmas party, who had watched Constance raise a glass and toast to family, began making quiet phone calls. Not to congratulate the Waverly family, to distance themselves from it. The Foundation's board called an emergency meeting. 3 trustees resigned within 2 weeks. Vivienne's social media presence, built carefully on the image of a glamorous, generous Waverly heir, began receiving questions she could not answer. She deleted several posts. Then she went quiet entirely. The Waverly name, which had opened doors across 3 states, was now opening different kinds of conversations. Quiet ones, the kind that happen in hallways and over dinner and in the careful pauses between sentences. I had not said a single word in public. I didn't need to. The truth had its own voice. Are you still with me? Because this is the part where everything they spent years building finally comes down completely. The accounts were the first to go. With the estate under my controlling interest and the financial investigation formally submitted to regulatory authorities, several of the Waverly family's joint accounts were frozen pending full review. This was not my personal decision. It was the automatic result of a formal misconduct filing. But the effect was immediate and devastating. Callum had been running a significant portion of his personal lifestyle through the family foundation's accounts. With those frozen, his daily financial reality changed overnight in ways he was completely unprepared for. The cars leased, the apartment funded through the foundation, the memberships, the club fees, the vacation property deposit, every single one of them traced back to money that was no longer accessible. Constance found herself unable to access household accounts she had controlled for decades. Nothing in the estate moved without Francis's approval now. Vivienne, who had always floated through her life on family money and a powerful surname, began to understand for the very first time what it meant to stand on your own 2 feet. The performance was over. The lights had come fully up. And without the props, the accounts, the reputation, the borrowed name, the Waverly family looked exactly like what they had always been, underneath all of it. People who had built a life they could not actually afford and charged every penny of it to someone else. I did not gloat. I want to be honest with you about that. There was no moment of loud celebration. There was only a deep, exhausted quiet, the kind that comes after a very long storm has finally passed. Dorian came back one final time. It was a February evening. He rang the doorbell of what had been our shared home, now legally transferred to my sole name as part of the estate proceedings. He stood on the front step in a coat I recognized well. He looked thinner, older, tired in a way that 6 weeks before would have made me feel something deep and difficult. I opened the door. He said, "I made a mistake." I looked at him for a long, steady moment. "No," I said, "you made a choice, many choices, over a very long time." "Elara, please." His voice cracked slightly. "The accounts, the legal fees, I'm starting from nothing. I need you to understand what that feels like." "I understand it completely," I said. "That is exactly why I engaged a divorce attorney, so that we could both move forward clearly and separately." "You don't have to do this, Dorian." I kept my voice even and calm. "You called me temporary. You planned my removal with another woman while I was organizing foundation events in the next room. You stood in a room full of people and stepped away from me to save yourself. And now you are here because you have nothing left." He said nothing. "I want you to hear this clearly," I said. "I don't hate you. I genuinely don't. But I will not be the soft place you fall when everything else is gone. That version of me no longer exists." He stood there a moment longer. Then he nodded once small, defeated, and walked away. I closed the door. I leaned against it. And I exhaled for what felt like the first time in 6 years. 1 month later, I called a meeting. Not a dramatic, theatrical gathering, just a clean, professional meeting at Francis's office. Present were Constance, Callum, Vivienne, and their respective attorneys. Dorian's attorney joined by phone. The estate attorney sat at the head of the table. I sat across from all of them. The same faces, the same basic room arrangement as the will reading, but the energy was entirely different. There was no performance left in Constance. She sat still, her hands folded in her lap. The grief she had always performed so beautifully was completely gone, replaced by something quieter and far more honest. Callum looked at the table. Vivienne looked at her hands. I had one document to present, a settlement proposal, clear, fair, and final. Constance would retain her personal residence, a smaller property separate from the main estate, a monthly provision, modest but adequate for the rest of her life. Callum's legal situation with the regulatory authorities would proceed on its own, that was outside my hands, and I made no promises about it. Vivienne would receive a transitional payment, giving her time to build her own financial footing independently. In exchange, all legal challenges to the will would be formally and permanently withdrawn. I slid the document across the table. "I am not here to destroy anyone," I said, "but I'm also not here to be told that everything I built is worth less than your family name. Read it carefully. Take whatever time you need." Constance picked it up slowly. For the first time in 6 years, she did not perform. She just read. The settlement was signed on a Thursday morning in late February. No drama, no cameras, no laughter echoing off marble floors, just signatures on clean paper and the quiet sound of a door finally closing. I had never wanted to destroy the Waverly family. I want you to understand that clearly before we reach the end of this story. What I had wanted, what I had worked carefully toward through 2 years of patient, quiet documentation was simply this truth: accountability, and the end of a system that had been built on cruelty, fraud, and the absolute certainty that certain people would always absorb, always forgive, and always disappear quietly when asked. Every forged receipt, every photograph saved at midnight, every text message and recorded conversation, every document in the truth folder that I had built one careful piece at a time. All of it had served one single purpose: Not revenge in the loud, dramatic sense of the word. Something more precise. Exposure. The Waverly family had operated for years behind a beautifully polished surface. They had used that surface to diminish, erase, and mock the people they considered beneath them. I had simply made sure the surface was removed. What was underneath it? The fraud, the affairs, the buried DNA, the fear that was always going to surface eventually. I had simply made sure it came out with solid documentation attached and no way to be rewritten afterward. I walked out of Francis's office into a cold February morning. The sun was pale and clean against the sky. For the first time in years, I had somewhere to be. And it was somewhere I had chosen entirely on my own. 3 months later, I stood in the main hall of the Waverly estate. My estate now. I had spent those months working with the foundation's remaining trustees, the ones who had chosen to stay to rebuild the organization on honest ground. New financial transparency protocols, a new leadership structure that actually served the charitable mission Alistair had originally built it for, decades before the family turned it into a vehicle for their own expenses. The renovation of the hall was nearly complete. I had kept most of Alistair's original design, the high ceilings, the warmth of the old library, the photographs that lined the upstairs corridor. What I removed were the things that had existed purely for appearance. What I added were small things, simple things. A reading room for community members open twice a week, free of charge. A partnership with the local school district for a scholarship fund. And in my private office, in a simple frame hung at eye level, a photograph of my parents. My father in his postal worker uniform. My mother at her classroom desk, surrounded by students laughing at something just out of frame. Alistair's cane leaned against the corner of that same office. I had kept it. I thought of him often. The quiet old man who had sat at the head of a loud and hollow table and watched everything with clear, steady eyes, who had seen me plainly when every other person in that house was looking straight through me, who had trusted me not just with money but with the responsibility of building something real. I intended to honor that. Not perfectly, but honestly. And honest, I had come to believe, is the only foundation worth building anything on. I am sitting in the library as I record this final part of my story. The same library where Alistair and I had our quiet conversations. The same shelves, the same afternoon light coming through the same windows. The only thing different is that the chair at the writing desk, Alistair's chair, is where I am sitting now. I want to be honest with you about how this ends. It does not end with a victory parade. It does not end with the people who hurt me groveling on their knees or with some perfect cinematic moment of triumph wrapped neatly in a bow. Real life is not built that way. Constance lives quietly in her smaller home. We have not spoken. Callum is managing a legal process that is moving at its own pace. Vivienne has started a small business of her own. I have heard she's working very hard at it. Dorian has moved to another city and is starting over. And me? I get up every morning in a house that is mine. I run a foundation that is real. I make decisions that matter and carry weight. I have dinner with people who know my name and speak it with genuine respect. I call my mother every Sunday. I sleep without fear. The black sheep of the Waverly family. The cheap wife. The outcast. The woman they filmed being escorted out of a Christmas party while the chandeliers sparkled overhead. I have one final question, and I genuinely want you to answer it in the comments below. If the people who tried to erase you could see your life right now, what would you want them to know? My answer is simple. I already knew. 幸好, if this story spoke to you, subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight. You are not alone. 幸好.